I'm Anna Castillo. I live in Windsor Hills. This is my mud. Thank you to Eric. They went ahead and they tried to get into the back ditch area to clean up, but he reported to me that it was too wet and they will have to try again. But I wasn't only here for that. I just happened to drive into the neighborhood today, and on the right-hand side on the fire hydrant, someone had a hose hooked up to it. It said United Rental to a 4,000 gallon capacity water truck. I went to speak with the gentleman and they were taking water. He said to irrigate the sod that TxDOT is doing along with the 242 improvements. So I asked about it, and of course he had a gauge. He was keeping track of what it was. He's no idea how much it cost. He's just there to do the job. So I looked up the trucks. You know, they are for rent, and of course it's very costly when you put in an estimate for 1 day, for a week, for a month. I don't know the cost of these trucks. I went ahead and put in my address. For 1 day it was like $1,000. For a week was 2,000, for a month was 6. So obviously it drops down, but there are 4,000 gallon water trucks available that they just hook up there. And obviously TxDOT has been doing these to gather water. So I don't know if there is any kind of feasibility, some availability to be able to do this. I know the month of April is going to be going fast, but for future flushings, for all our hydrants, I don't know the quantity of water that's flushed out that just goes out to nowhere. I don't know if these trucks are something, maybe someone in the area has them and we can come up with some kind of contract or borrow, or money obviously is going to be the deciding factor. So I don't know, I just happened to come across it, Lord and behold, as I was coming on my way to your meeting. So I thought I'd come let you know that, I was kind of happy to see that it does exist. I just don't know, knowing what my 1,000 gallons cost, I don't know apples to apples how that cost will work out. So just wanted to let you know, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.
And thank you for trying again, Eric.
We're still.
Appreciate it. Yeah, we'll tell the rain to kind of quit until you guys are done. Thank you.
Can you share with Anna what the procedures are for
Yes.
somebody, what they're supposed to do?
Yeah, contractors will be required to come and rent a transit meter, which is what we call it. And that meter is basically something they pick up here physically, and then they would put that on the flush valve to fill their truck.
That's what I saw today then.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So when they turn that in, we do the reading. It's basically a meter,
Mhm.
a movable meter. And then when they turn that in, they're required to pay for the water that they use.
Right.
Regardless of how much they ended up using.
Right. Okay.
So-
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, if I would ask the public, and this, unfortunately, it happens quickly. If you ever see that setup and there's not a big metal looking thing between the hose and the fire hydrant, they're stealing water.
Oh, no, I got out. Okay,
Yeah,
will do.
just saying.
I got out. I spoke with the guy. I looked at it. I didn't take a picture of it,
Yeah.
but I was watching. He says, I have to keep track of this. I have to look at the needle, and I'm looking for a certain number. I don't know what it costs, but we're doing this because it's going to water the sod that TxDOT is putting on the 242
There are
project.
folks that'll just park right up to it, hook it up and go, and not have a meter, but that's not the right.
Okay, all right. Thanks for letting me know. Thanks.
Kenny has a good observation, just to follow up. So I know we do a lot of flushing, and Chris does a good job of telling us how much water we've flushed, and we keep track of that. And you made a good point. It depends on economics and it depends on need, right? At that time we're flushing, there's somebody that needs the water and willing to pay whatever it is for the water, because that's like, once we flush it, it's worthless to us, right? It's a loss. Have we ever tried to establish potential users in anticipation of the flushing season?
I don't think that would be very efficient.
I don't know.
It'd be
Yeah,
very
you know more
difficult.
about it.
Yeah, it'd be very difficult to try to partner up a particular truck with our flushing program.
Yeah, it takes a need, like a construction need at 242 or.
Certainly that, for sure.
Yeah.
Anytime there's any construction in and around the Woodlands, we make sure that folks do get the original meters.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
Item 3, consider an act on a request for adjustments to or relief from specific charges imposed by the district. Anybody want anything removed from the consent agenda?
4 and 6, please.
4 and 6.
Briefly. 4 is the minutes and 6 is question on the investments.
Okay. You have a motion for the others?
So moved.
Okay. All right.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Item 4,
Yeah,
Review and act on minutes of the March meeting.
thank you. On item number 10, page 2, where Thaler's talking. I reread that. I don't think it accurately it reflected probably what I said, but I think it needs to be written better to reflect what I meant. And so I've suggested wording, and the wording would be Director Thaler would like the record to reflect that the SJRA did not send a representative to attend MUD 67's March BOD meeting to answer questions about critical concerns and ongoing studies. It's just noting that they weren't here and I expressed concern.
Okay. Any other on that?
And that's all I have on the minutes.
Motion to approve with the adjustment.
So moved. So moved.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And then item 6.
Item six is simply a question about the Chase 12-month CD rate. That's yeah, you all know it's much worse than the others. Can you tell me how much money is in that CD?
Nothing. That's just for comparison.
Oh, I feel so much better now.
Veritex and then Chase is just for comparison as well as the Fed rate.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Sure.
Well, that's a bad rate.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was it. Thank you. I make a motion, we approve
Item 6.
item 6.
Second.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Item 10, see the regular monthly STRA Woodlands Division report, including updates on operations, projects, and public outreach.
Our report begins on page 31 in your packet. It includes the Woodlands as well as the GRP reports. Nothing really out of the ordinary. One thing I did want to point out is that on page 32, you're going to see flushing in the amount of 5.2 million. This is due to 3 wells that we had rehab. During the rehab, you have to basically redevelop the well, flush out the well and everything else, disinfect it. So it's a large number because we had 3 wells rehab. So that is typical for well rehabs, just not typical for the month of flushing.
We just flush those like we do the hydrants up there.
To a certain degree, but they're flushed for 12 to 24 hours continuously. And so when you're talking 1,000, 1,200 GPMs, it's quite a bit of water.
We like our clean water though.
Agree. So you're flushing out water that really can't be used everywhere else because that's saying the contaminants and other stuff that's in it. The other thing I did want to do is in the back, we have a few people here. Most of y'all know Jason Williams and Aaron Schindewolf. They've come before, but I do have 2 people here that have not been here before. So I want them to kind of explain who they are.
Good afternoon. I'm Malia Good. I'm the new Utility Enterprise Administrative Manager working for Chris. I just started with SJRA about 2 months ago, and I look forward to with y'all. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm Jake Everett. I'm the Utility Enterprise Maintenance Manager, and I've been here about 15 and a half years.
So I've asked them to come for the next 3 months, well, April, May, and June, just to kind of get a feeling for the questions y'all ask, what you guys are looking for, and this is for all the MUDs, as well as to be backups. So what was discussed earlier with the lack of attendance in, I think it was February, maybe March, whatever. March, thank you.
Yeah.
Then these are some of the people that could be in attendance instead of me or Ed being here. It's Malia was the one that was possible to be here. However, she had been here less than a month and didn't feel appropriate to put her
That's fair.
over here. So
So you're counting now in the future to have some coverage at all of our MUD meetings and the trustee meeting. So there is someone to answer questions or take information.
at most, but maybe not all of the meetings, just depending. So we're gonna.
that.
It's basically, if y'all have a lot on the agenda, so if you're going through like your budgets, your taxes and stuff that has nothing to do with us, we typically stay out unless we know there's a question. Now, keep in mind, if there's anything that you ever want us to be at the meeting for, just let us know. We'll be happy to be there. So,
Yeah, but as you know, we have an awful lot on our agenda with all the capital programs that are going to talk about in your 10-year plan, and there was no one here to answer questions. So, good. Thank you very much for making arrangements to have somebody here in the future.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Item 11, receive presentation of SJR Woodlands Division.
I need to go over something with y'all.
Go. Chris, Don?
unless you have any other.
I just have real quick on page 43.
Okay.
Just what are the different colors in that top graph? I don't know. Printer here, good. Page 44, that was easy enough. The woodland on the top graph, the woodlands is which color?
The Woodlands is orange.
That 119.
Yes.
Okay, and who's the blue?
The blue is Quad Vest. They're an investor-owned utility.
Yes, running out of another, it was Aqua Texas, another blue, no?
Aqua Texas is kind of maroon.
Yeah, who's
There is a lighter blue, and that's, if I'm reading that correctly, remaining participants.
I thought that was green. But here's what, I was confused by the colors, and because the Woodlands in the next one is different color as well. So if it's a printer, it could be a printer error as well, equally, right? So just in the future, that's all.
We'll double check on our
Yeah,
side
thanks.
just to see.
So like if you made the Woodlands the same color on both of those, which I think you've done in the past.
Yeah, the pink,
Yeah, it's just,
the pink stripe is us making the.
well, you have a pink stripe?
Not on that page,
Okay, that one,
That one.
I understand printers are different depending on.
but the color wheel is not, that was, that's.
Okay, thanks, no problem, that was it, Chris, nothing,
No, we'll do that.
just for the future,
That comes right there.
For some reason, we're missing a color on the legend. We'll get that fixed.
no worries, thank you, small thing, but just to help us all keep on abreast of everything.
Appreciate it.
So
Go ahead, Ed.
I handed y'all a memo regarding Bear Branch Dam. Some of y'all have not been here as long as others, and so it's probably time to bring you up to date on Bear Branch Dam. So I'm starting at the very top under historical. There are 5 months that pay for Bear Branch Dam operation and maintenance. You all are one of those. Bear Branch Dam is considered an intermediate size high hazard dam. Intermediate has to do with the height of the dam, and high hazard has to do with the number of lives that are at stake downstream or the number of structures that are downstream. But this is a rating through the TCQ, which regulates our dams. As part of those regulations, we're required to have an emergency action plan, dam inspection reports every 5 years, and an operation and maintenance manual, and all of those things we do have. I know we've got inspection reports that go back at least to 2005, 2010. We haven't been responsible for this since the beginning. So
What's it built?
what's that?
What year was it built?
At 1983.
83, oh, thank you. You got it, 05.
So on the dam, we have the concrete part that you can see from Kirkendall. That's the downstream side. On the upstream side, we have soil cement and a concrete spillway. The soil cement is about 2 feet thick. And during the inspection reports over the years, they've said that soil cement is degrading and needs rehabilitation. We've had some problems with the construction joints on the dam on the downstream side because it wasn't constructed with water stops and various other methods of keeping water out from underneath. Part of the other inspections have identified some voids under the spillway. And so 2 years ago, we had an interim project that we spent about $160,000 funded by the 5 MUDs to go in and do an interim repair on the construction joints, resolve the voids, and also just do some minor maintenance.
The voids just from leaking water eroding?
Yes. And some of those voids were 2.5 foot thick and expanded out, a good, say 30 square feet. So a fair amount of space. We got through that with the idea that that was an interim repair and that we would come back within a couple of years and do a permanent fix on the spillway. So in 2024, we went out for requests for qualifications for engineers that do dam work. And that's about 4 or 5 companies responded. We chose a firm by the name of Schnabel, and that's mentioned at the very bottom of the first page. They do work nationally. They're based out of Austin, or they have an office in Austin. And so they have prepared a preliminary engineering report, and they came back with some recommendations on the original project, which was to rehabilitate the soil cement and also to design a replacement for the service spillway, which is the V-notch shape that you see as you look at it. They also came back with a recommendation on the emergency spillway, and that is the flat concrete that comes over the crest of the dam and then goes down into the stilling basin. That was unexpected. They said that under design conditions, that emergency spillway is deficient in concrete thickness. The concrete that's there is 8 inches thick. What they're suggesting is that by design, because you're designing that spillway to withstand any uplift pressure if water were to get under it. And so what they've said is they're recommending it should be 13 to 14 inches thick.
That's just the weight of the concrete to keep
Yes.
it from popping up.
To keep it from popping up. So this was a surprise because it had not been mentioned in any of the inspection reports or up till now.
So when it was originally constructed in 83, did it meet design criteria at that time?
I
8
have-
inches?
I presume it did, but, or they may have calculated the uplift pressure differently then versus now. But I checked with a couple of the other firms that we do work with, that Fraser Nichols, who is our Lake Conroe dam engineer, talked to HDR, who also does some of our dam inspections, and they said 13 to 14 inches is pretty standard for that. Now, when you compare that to the spillway downstream of Lake Conroe Dam, that concrete is 3 to 4 feet thick because of the hydraulic pressure coming from those releases. So it varies based on the size of the dam, the height, and the volume.
What they're saying makes sense to you.
Yes.
And replacement of the soil cement and doesn't help prevent the water from getting underneath it.
No.
Okay.
That's just protecting the upstream side, the reservoir side of the embankment. So when they came back with a recommendation on the item that we were not anticipating, they did not put a cost estimate with it. So we went back to them and said, okay, give us a ballpark number so that we can start budgeting, because it's not in the budget. So I'm towards the top half of the second page where it says estimated cost. Estimated cost for the original project is about 5.7 million. We had anticipated it being 5.2 originally. The new recommendation, which is replacing the emergency spillway, they've estimated about 5.5 million. So when you add the two together, we're at 11.2. And then you add in, and that's just construction costs. Then you add in engineering, which we're estimating at about 20%. You have an estimated project total of 13.44 million. And right now, we've only got 5.2 identified. So where's the 5.2 coming from? There's 3.6 million that's coming through the Army Corps of Engineers. That was one of the first projects Congressman Crenshaw got allocated or appropriated for the woodlands. There's 1.6, 1.7 million of local funds from the 5 MUDs that pay for operation and maintenance. And that's been accumulated over 2 budget years. So when you look at that, we're still at a shortfall. Congressman Crenshaw's office has asked for new projects for funding for FY26 federal allocations or appropriations. So what we're recommending is that we submit documentation to Congressman Crenshaw's office to apply for the 5 million, but that's going to require a local match. And it's going to be more than the normal 25%, just because their total and the max you can get from Crenshaw's office is 5 million on any project any given year. So we're total of about $5 million short. 1.7 million comes out of the 5. So in reality, we're 3.2 to $3.3 million short of new money. So there are a couple of ways to get new money. Down at the very bottom of this page, I list in the far left column the different MUDs pro rata share based on your SFDUEs that contribute to the Bear Branch drainage area. And so you all are at 17.2%.
Excuse me, does that come out of the 6th and final accounting?
No, this is based on Mike Mooney and not to call Jim out, but Jim.
It's drainage area that influences the
Bear
the
Branch.
dam and the drainage basin.
When was that done? I guess it's.
about 4 years ago when we did the first Bear Branch project.
And is that the same ratio or accounting that we used for the cost relative to the
No.
Bear Branch? It's a different accounting.
Different ratio.
Okay.
Because in your case, some of your mud drains to Bear Branch, some of it doesn't. Same with 46 and 47. You know, if you look at the map, excuse me, 46, you've got different areas of 46 that are not on Bear Branch, and they do not participate.
You also have a participant that does not flow any water in on the other project, Metro. They put in 1 million.
Yeah, okay.
That's skewed.
This is a separate drainage map somewhere. Okay.
Yes. So if you do cash of the 3.2 million, this would be that column under the 3,200,000. Your pro rata share of the cash would be $550,400. And we would need that in about 18 months roughly. If you don't use cash that's already been allocated, use that for something else, keep it in reserves, and you bond fund the total 5 million or 4.9. If it's at a 15-year rate or a 15-year term, it's roughly $81,000 a year for 15
And
years.
that would be a bond through SJRA.
Correct. If you do it over a 20-year period, it's $67,600 annually. One of the reasons to consider bonds is the service life of this is about 50 to 60 years. So you're spreading the cost out over future residents instead of all being current residents. It's really your all's choice of how you want to come up with your pro rata share. But something to keep in mind is you would, because it was asked at one of the other MUD meetings, is would the MUD sell the bonds? And generally, these amounts aren't large enough unless you're looking at MUD 47. They're not large enough to go sell a bond and have it cost effective just because of some of the costs that are associated with the soft costs associated with getting the bonds. So that's why SJRA would sell the bonds and do the project, and then you all would just pay your pro rata shares. Now, we're not asking for funding today. All we're asking for is your support to sign a letter that would go to Congressman Crenshaw's office saying the MUDs of the Woodlands that pay for Bear Branch Dam are supportive of the pursuit of additional funding for the project.
That's all we're asking today.
Yes. And 3 out of the 5 have already said yes to the support letter. Eric has found a letter from several years ago where it was one letter signed by the 5 MUD presidents. And so we're bringing you the background today so you know why we're asking for the letter of support.
Did somebody reject that or they just haven't been asked yet?
We haven't been,
These two, they haven't been asked.
Right.
Yes, it's
We're number
okay.
4
Okay.
and 5.
now, the deadline for submission was last Friday. They've got the package of the project itself. They just don't have the community support letter. And so we're asking that, once we get through all the MUD meetings today, and if everybody's unanimous on it, we can get a letter and go forward.
All these numbers assume that we'll get the 5 million.
Yes, sir.
And do you know when we'll hear if it's on the list at least?
Well, let me walk you back through that. Crenshaw pulls requests early in the process so that his office has time to go through and evaluate. Typically, the appropriations bill is being considered November, December of the calendar year. So if this coming December, if Congress actually acts on the appropriations and if it gets added into the appropriations gets approved, it's likely we would have money a year from now. Now, if it doesn't make the list, we can do the project in 2 phases, or local fund everything above what we already have in the way of federal dollars.
So what, in that interim period, do you have other work that you will do, engineering, planning,
Yes.
et cetera? That we need funding for that?
Funding already exists for that.
Okay.
So there are some things we've got to get squared away with the Army Corps of Engineers. we've got to get our consultant to go into the next phase of engineering, but we've got to get some answers from the Corps before we're prepared to tell him which way to go.
Oh, good.
Did I see where there was a presentation to the township about supporting funding? Did they act on this?
I think they did, because we were asking the township, you all, and maybe the commissioner's office.
Okay.
So, and that would have been late last month.
Do they want to help fund this?
No, just a letter of
It's
support.
just a letter of support.
I'll be happy to write them a letter of support too for their spending.
And I think for sure we ought to pursue that. I'm still a little raw with the 5.5 million needed to upgrade that
So,
spillway. So I hope you'll do a deep dive and make sure
Yes.
there's no wiggle room.
so the Corps is asking for permission out of their money to do a risk assessment of the project. Now, internally, we were thinking, okay, it's a risk assessment of the structure. Well, it's not. It's a risk assessment of just the facility itself. You know, why is it there? What's at risk downstream? That sort of thing, things that we already have. So we're reluctant to pay them $220,000 to do a risk assessment that doesn't do a structural analysis.
Right.
But we do have more questions that need to be answered. Yes, sir.
If I could do a quick summary. A, we get the additional funding through Crenshaw's office. B, we're able to come up with a local match.
Mhm.
And then at that point, we're 3.2 million short totally as a project.
Yes.
And so we're roughly 17.2% of that. So we're 500 grand plus.
Mhm.
This was one of the major items when we had the discussion about how much cash we need to maintain in MUD 67. And this was one of my major concerns, and it has come home to roost now. And I'm glad we kept the cash on hand because we do have an option to cash fund this.
Right.
In my opinion, it needs a lot more study, obviously. So,
And
are these
I will tell you,
percentages?
these are ballpark numbers.
I understand.
The percentage is pretty solid.
And so you've taken out in MUD 67, for example, all of this stuff that's in the East Shore area. All those connections are not included in this calculation.
That's my understanding. And I say it that way because the percentages I got from Mike Mooney before he left office.
You'll find that, yes, the areas that don't drain into it, the MUDs that have area that do not drain into this drainage basin are not included in the percent.
So this part of 46 would not be in it. This part of 67. So most of 47, these two pieces of 47, that's probably why they put 50%. This piece may not be, and this piece of 67 may not be. Because it drains downstream of, what is that, Goslin? No, here's Goslin. So this part may be, but this part may not be.
And
Yeah, that-
these are
that
the,
drains,
these are the same percentages that are used each year to get the MUD share to fund
Operation and maintenance.
operation and
Right.
maintenance
Yeah,
of it. So it's been,
So these, I continue, you go back to the email that I provided the WWA back in 21, use the same numbers.
I'll second the motion to support the letter to Crenshaw's office.
Thanks, sir.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you all very much.
Yes, and/or act on wastewater treatment plant number 1, evaluation by Carollo Engineers.
An item that was requested by John to have an opportunity to bring up any topics.
Yeah, and the reason I asked to have it put on the agenda is I thought when we had the last meeting, I found out we could not discuss among the 5 of us, what we learned at that all mud meeting, that it had to be done in an open meeting. And I thought that given that we don't get together and getting together in a public meeting and discussing what we learned at that all mud meeting would be important for our future deliberations on what to do. So I was curious, I mean, what other people thought about the meeting and what we learned from the condition assessment. And then what we learned about the path forward on the NPVs and the different repair and place cases.
Well, generally, I thought the consultant did quite a good job, thorough job at the analysis of the existing facilities that are there, the ones that the major items that they picked out as representative for the plant. They did very thorough analysis. Couldn't necessarily think of anything else that they would have done on that. So would give them personally high marks for that. For me anyway, there are two questions, when it comes down to the new plant is around the capacity of the plant. And that's where it gets a little fuzzy for me, where everything else seemed to be very definitive and we had data to support it all. Suddenly these numbers come in with the SFDUEs, particularly for the future ones, the 1.7, and then things that might be expected after that. Where those numbers came from, I'm assuming there's a basis for them, but that basis wasn't shared with us to the same extent that the other data about the analysis that they did. And so I don't necessarily have an issue with the contractor because as we understood it from them, they are based their analysis based on that data that was given to them. That was not data that they generated. So that's a bit of again, that's a little fuzzy for me. And I personally would like to know more about that, where those numbers came from. And I think I mentioned at one time to Eric after that meeting that I think it would be great to be able to see a breakdown of that 1.7 on a per mud by mud basis. So, the existing and then this future, just to give us some idea where these numbers are listed, to this be transparent all the way through the process.
It might be appropriate just to have a redo or a refresher of those capacity numbers and how they were.
From the wastewater master plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've prepped Ed and his staff on that.
Good.
So we get that March, the May 8th meeting or what? Yeah, that's the plan for that. So another thing for the May 8th meeting. Wow. So that's
total amount of capacity should tie to the capacity that's been purchased by all the districts to date in their supplemental agreement. The river authority is contractually obligated, obviously, to provide capacity. So that should be your outside number. Now, trying to do some digging about how many units are actually being used by a district. I can't speak to how that would be done, partially
Vacant versus
occupied.
non-vacant, yeah.
Like partially occupied commercial buildings. I know Oxy have moved out of some of the towers and in Metro, don't know how much those have been reoccupied. So that may be a little bit more, for lack of a better term, squishy. But I think the hard number on the outside should be the amount of capacity that each district has purchased as a companies have purchased from the group.
And the whole idea of this 2-hour peak also, the whole plant is being designed based on that need to meet that 2-hour peak. Is it, if there needs to be an upgrade to a particular asset to do that, does the whole plant have to do that? Or is, some part of the plant considered to be grandfathered? Or does everything need to be?
I don't know the answer to that. That's more the engineer
We
world
do.
than,
And what is that answer?
The answer is, as Mira pointed out, there are certain processes that either meet the 2-hour peak or don't. And those that don't, if you have to touch them, you have to design based on the more current rules, which is under chapter 217.
When you say touch them, do you mean modify?
If you are having to add capacity,
Well, that's right. That's different than touching. Let's be clear on what we're modifying, because there are regulations about when you have to apply. And
we're very well aware of the
Well, okay, then let me read it. Let's see, any modification that changes a treatment or capacity, intended function, process, mode of operation, configuration, design parameter, or major design assumption. So those aren't touching, those aren't repairs, the general repairs, they're not coatings. And that's pretty quite clear that some of the things that we talked about in the condition assessment that was provided, and as Steve said, was done a really good job, very thorough. And not one of their recommendations would touch on that modification. Every one of them, except perhaps the lift station, depending on what we did with it.
Aeration basin.
And of the things that they looked at, they recommended a program that did not contain any significant modifications. Remembering that they picked 6 items that they chose, not us, that they said were representative of the structural strength of that facility. And they were very complimentary of what you guys have done today, that it was an older facility that's being run very well and is in pretty good shape. And every item that they looked at, except that lift station, they said had another 20 years of life if we did the remedial program that they suggested. All of which, under my interpretation, could be wrong, doesn't require the modification and won't lose the grandfather clause. So we seem to be hanging, and I appreciate that she said that as well at the meeting. It seems to me we're hanging an awful lot on an assumption of what the TCEQ will do based on these modifications. And I, for one, would like to see get us either the MUD or the trustees hire a legal professional that deals with the TCEQ on a regular basis to confirm for us that the assumptions that are being made in that NPV model about what has to be done are indeed reality. Because if they're not, there's other ways to build the base case that don't require major capital expenditure for 20 years or 15 at least. So I'm not understanding why we say touching it generates a grandfather clause, because I couldn't find it. So I'd like to recommend that we find somebody that's a technical expert. You just said you're not. That we the trustees bring in to advise us on what type of assumptions to make in that NPV case. Anybody else have anything on that?
Well, in this meeting on the 22nd, which is a trustee meeting.
What meeting is that? I'm sorry, you're gonna
A
tell us?
trustee meeting,
Okay,
a re-meeting, if you will, on this whole discussion.
okay.
And is the San Jacinto River Authority part of that meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Are we going to address the 6th and final accounting and all the details which might answer those questions? Why can't that be laid out and handed to everybody? I guess I don't understand.
6th and final as it relates to what?
The SFD thing.
That's NCUEs. You know, at the last meeting, we had a trustee stand up and wave a book around for the 5th interim accounting, which is, one generation before the final. So why would we even deal with that?
Well, the analysis that was done that identifies the 1.7 and what people are talking about as far as the capacity goes is all documented in the wastewater master plan, which the newer directors, it's been given to them, but they haven't read it, or some of them haven't. So we can certainly provide that, but I think that gives a lot of the background that a lot of the newer directors are asking about.
And does that tie into this 6th and final?
I believe so. I believe that was the core of what went into that, and then also an estimation of what future capacities would be needed related to the undeveloped properties that Howard Hughes still.
I think that would go a long way toward answering all these questions.
Sure.
I agree.
It would sure help, but
And if we do have the
I think
material,
it's already been said that was planned to be discussed.
but if we do have the reference,
Presented. Excuse me.
yeah, I'm sorry.
And presented.
Well, keep in mind though, the 6th and final was capacity purchased as of, what was that, 2017?
March of 17.
So there have been some incremental capacity purchases by districts since that time. So really, to me, in this discussion, the only real usefulness in the 6th and final is to your point, Steve, about the outside hard number of how many units have been purchased. And that's really going to tie more to each district's supplemental agreement, not necessarily to the 6th and final, since there have been some, not a lot, but there have been a handful of capacity purchases since that time.
we're relying on something that's 8 years old to help us make a decision.
No.
7 years old? How old?
No, it's just the most recent for each district.
Oh, not the
Purchase of
6th and final.
capacity.
Oh, you're talking about bringing the 6th and final up to current.
No. So the 6th and final dealt with reallocation and some additional purchases of capacity.
Okay.
Some, where districts were reducing the amount of capacity they needed up to what was anticipated to be through a 10-year horizon. Since that time, there have been additional development,
Mhm.
changes in proposed use, annexations, what have you, that have resulted in some one-off additional purchases of capacity. So if you're trying to figure out the amount of unused capacity that is being included in whatever these, presentations have, what really matters is what is the river authority contractually obligated to provide to each district.
Okay.
That's what matters. And so this isn't,
I gotcha.
the only purpose of that would be to help for those districts that haven't purchased more capacity. How many units have they bought? But what matters is how much has been purchased, that the river authority is obligated to provide, because then they have to build their facility to meet all the obligations of the districts that purchase capacity.
So my understanding, and it's a good thing to clear up. I have a number of people express interest or concern about it. But my understanding, and Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, based on that presentation of the All Mud meeting, that's the final number, and the fact that if we're not grandfathered, we have to build additional facilities to handle a higher peak flow. However, we are grandfathered as long as we don't build or change to modify the plant we don't have to build to that new high standard. We don't have to instantly build until we modify something. So let me go get that. You know what I'm talking? That might make sense.
I'm going to try and answer your question.
If you know what it was. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
First of all, I'm going to step back a little bit and say, in the strategic plan, Friesen Nichols identified all the processes and basins that did not meet criteria for the TCQ. And there's a chart in there, and it's more comprehensive than what Carollo developed and presented to you all at the All Mud meet. So
One question, interrupting, when you said it meets the criteria, the TECQ, was this criteria, is that to meet the 2-hour?
both average day and
Okay.
2-hour.
Just to make sure I
So
understand.
they looked at that.
Okay.
And then Carollo did an independent analysis, and theirs is not as conservative. It's not super liberal, but it's not as conservative. So that said, anytime you go in and modify a basin, add to it, that means you're having to modify your permit or amend your wastewater permit. That is when things start going awry with TCQ and having to deal with upgrades on certain processes. Now, to go back to your question earlier, lift station, if we got to rebuild the lift station, combine it, I think it was mentioned there are 2 lift stations, number 1s, and then there's a lift station 2. So lift station 1 in the plant and lift station 2 in the plant are planned to be combined into one. So that would be designed under the Chapter 217 rule. The 2 aeration basins that have been out of service for 10 plus years is part of the reason the aeration process does not meet the criteria, because it's fine for the current average daily flow, but if our average daily flow picks up, we don't have enough capacity. So the aeration basins would have to be upgraded or designed based on Chapter 217. Clarifiers, if we do not think we have enough for average daily flow, but they're not sized to accommodate peak flow. So if you remember, there were
Requirements for peak flow, or the ones if the new ones if we do a modification of the plant?
I'm not understanding your question.
As I understand it, again, from that presentation, we have a 2-hour peak flow. We have to build 4 times.
Correct.
Okay, but we don't have to do that right now. Under our grandfather clause, we don't have to do it. Is that not correct?
Forget the grandfather. If you have to change something with the clarifiers, not motors, not internal workings, if you have to build another clarifier, that falls under 217.
That's exactly what I said. Short of major modifications for the TCEQ's own stuff, their own 217, short of that, we are grandfathered. When you're building a base case, it's important to know the timing of when you have to do this. I'm not disagreeing that you'll need to do things eventually. Not at all.
If you're currently not in compliance with certain aspects of the criteria,
Well, in that case, in this base case, that better be in the assumptions and clearly identified for the all mud meeting, because the model that she discussed briefly, and it was only briefly, did not include that type of analysis. So, and again, I'm going to fall back. I think we need to hire a consultant to the TCEQ process to be clear to the MUDs, because again, we're the fiduciary responsibility for our ratepayers. If
Well-
we're not doing our job by making sure that before we launch into hundreds of millions of dollars of investment on a model that may not be accurate, I would be not doing my job as a director for a MUD.
I would say you've already hired that expert.
Well, I disagree, because given what I heard, the muddled thought about what repair in place was with all the new builds, that seemed to be building as much as every other case, it made no sense. And I will know as soon as I see that MPV model, whether it makes sense or not, as long as she provides the appropriate assumptions tied to what the regulations say. Not an assumptions, not if we decide to change the lift station, because that's a decision that we make. We may be able to live with that lift station for 20 years or somebody else's analysis. We saw that in the structural analysis. Structural analysis and the 6 elements they looked at were the same as freezing nickel within a couple of years. We have and the argument that I heard her say in the all mud meeting was, we were told to build for 50 years. And I don't disagree with that. I mean, like you said, you have a long-term forecast. However, if you can repair that plant for 10 years before you launch into major modifications that necessitate bigger capacity, you can build the bigger capacity in years 15 and 20 and have a 70-year plant. So that argument of only building for 20 years on repair in place isn't a fair case. It has to encompass what we would do in years 15 to 20 or whenever it would be that you would schedule appropriately to do the modifications that you think will be required for the new volumes. Additionally, if we wait 10 years, if we can reasonably do an aggressive maintenance and operation plan, in 10 years, we'll have a whole better understanding of what our real needs are in the Woodlands, because there's nothing left to be built out. Unless in 10 years, I don't know what could possibly be left. So we're making assumptions on what that peak flow case will be, and we're going to build a ton of stuff now to answer that, when we can possibly do a repair in place case if it's done correctly, and answer that question for us in 10 years when we will know how much to invest. So that's my challenge. And again, I want to go back to, I don't think we have an expert in the TCEQ. I'd like us to hire, you hire her. I want us to hire our own. I think we should have a TCEQ expert that can tell us if we're making any sense, what modifications make sense and how to modify. No comments, no questions?
Well, as I said, an awful lot is hanging on that number in the interpretation about grandfathering in TCEQ. I mean, so what is your view, Brian, with regard to that?
Well, like I said, that's an area that's outside of my area of expertise. I mean, I think that the River Authority, under the contract, I can tell you that, under the contract, they've got an obligation to operate the facilities in compliance with their permits. So they have an obligation to the districts to do that and should be meeting those obligations as part of this process. So you do have that contractual obligation that I can tell you.
Yeah, but I just heard from Ed that if we touch something, we lose the grandfather clause, and that is not true.
And I can't.
And I think, and the other outside expert needs to explain these variances to us. Variance is a possibility if you're not impacting the health of the citizens. And I don't know how extensive that variability is. If you want a certain project, you're going to do a modification, and whether you can alleviate that some better way. And again, that's another expert. Where if you want a variance, we've been able to get variances of this in the past and not that. And again, that's not what we're hearing. I didn't hear anybody mention variance until I think it's Mira said, "Oh, I don't make any assumptions on variance."
At this conceptual stage, it's not appropriate to look at variances. Once you get into the actual design, that's when you start thinking about variance. But to be able to give you a reasonable conceptual cost estimate, you have to assume no variance.
Oh, I think that's fair. Totally agree. I just, again, an expert can tell us, oh, those are totally this never happens with a clarifier. Oh, yeah, you can do it if you do this. I'm not getting that sense of expertise based on the analysis and discussions I've heard today.
I have two comments. One, I mean, I agree with John in that if the base case is structured to recognize to extend the life of the existing facilities within compliance a bit longer before we make a major investment. That seems to make sense because we, as I said, you get that that increment plus the 50 years, and your NPV is certainly going to be affected by that decision. But separate from that, and this may be an oversimplified view of things, but I kind of wonder with this 2-hour peak flow issue, is it beyond the realm of possibility? We have these 2 idle, waiting to be demolished aeration basins that are sitting there. Could those be engineered to accept peak flow water as a holding and then run off at a later time to avoid us having to engineer the entire plant for this higher rate?
Those 2 basins are out of service because they are structurally unsound. The reason they didn't test them is because it's already proven they're structurally unsound. We had a project on the CIP to replace those basins 5 years ago, 6 years ago. We put that on hold during all these studies because it was going to be an $18 million expense. So we're sitting there waiting to get past all these studies so decisions can be made on how to move forward. I guess I would like to suggest, let's give Mira a chance to put all the information in front of you before you make decisions on which way we're going. The other thing, certain people have called this a base case. It's a repair in place option. That's the way it's titled in the scope of work.
Actually, I'm looking at page 7 of Corolla's.
I understand what's in their stuff.
That's base case. And
That's their words.
You know, I come out of the private industry. The first damn thing you do is you make a base case. You measure what's wrong. You say, these things are broken. Can I reasonably fix? And if I can, how do I go forward? That's the first case you
That's
run.
what we're calling the repair in place.
That's okay. Well, it's a base case, and you run the base case. You don't to see if you can responsibly and prudently maintain operations safely and effectively at the right cost. And we're doing this as the last case. It should have been done as a first case, but okay, I can accept that. But that's one of the reasons there was so many people ran for an election in May of last year, because we felt the base case wasn't done. Now we're doing the base case. Let me ask you a simple question. Who constructed the base case?
Who?
Yes.
Who
will the repair in place case? Who constructed it? Who sat there and said, okay, this is the timing, this is the cost, this is what we're going to do in year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Who did that?
Well, Corolla is working on that right now.
And who else? Are they the only one? They did it independently, or did you participate? Did you or this River Authority participate in it?
We're managing the project, but we're not directing the engineer to do anything.
But you are in the meetings as building that case?
They're asking questions of us, yes.
Okay, so
we are not directing their work.
Anybody from the Woodlands Water Authority in those meetings? No. And the reason I ask, at the end of the day, who pays for this? My ratepayers, right? We have a fiduciary responsibility. At the end of the day, we're going to pay for this one way or the other. And it's everybody on the trust board of trustees and everybody in the MUD, every director in the MUD has a fiduciary responsibility to their people, but we're not involved in building the case that we're going to pay for.
No,
I don't,
because you're not in charge of the operations of the plant.
I have the fiduciary responsibility to do. I'm not in charge of the operations. I'm not saying you shouldn't be involved. I'm surprised that we're not involved. That's my concern, is I don't see what fiduciary responsibility do you have to my ratepayers?
The same contractual responsibility I have to all the other MUDs.
I asked you a specific question. You don't have any responsibility.
Yes, I do.
To my ratepayers?
I have an ethical responsibility along with my staff to provide a case for you all to consider. And that's what those 4 options are.
Ethical is not fiduciary. There's a difference in fiduciary and ethical. And you are right. You have a fiduciary.
Are you saying I'm not ethical?
I never said that in a million words. No, I said you don't have a fiduciary responsibility. It's a different thing. You have a fiduciary responsibility of the River Authority as an employee. That is true. And to conduct your business.
I have the same fiduciary responsibility to my customers. And you are a customer.
Exactly. I am the customer. And I work for my ratepayers. And the simple question was, who's building this case? And the answer is nobody associated with the Woodlands Water and the ratepayers are building the case, are participating to represent them.
You
My
also,
concern again is that you're not, the case is, that we're gonna be throwing a case in May 8th that's going, there's like 10 things gonna be covered on May 8th. And somehow people seem to have a 2-hour limit that people get tired. It's just human nature. And there's no way in heck that we could even go through one base case appropriately in 2 hours. Not if we're going to understand spending a couple $100 million, $500 million to choose between a base case, case 2, case 3, and case 4. There's no way. There's just gonna be way too much information and you're not gonna get into the depth you can in a 50-person meeting. So I hope that, I heard the special meeting for the trustees. I hope they do something. But at the end of the day, I'm skeptical that we're going to have what we need to understand in this base case to say that is a case that makes sense. And I don't see any reiteration or loops to say, well, we can work on that and see if we can get it better. Because that's what you do in real life. And then when you're doing a base case and net present value, you say, oh, let's look at that and go, well, what if we do this and what if we do that? Is that going to get a better, more effective, cost-effective solution? Because that's the way most people do it in the real world. We don't just throw something down because a consultant said it and say it's good. So that's my fear.
don't have any other questions? You
No other
like-
questions, but I do agree with John on one point that there's an awful lot expected to be reviewed in the depth, I think that's going to be required on May 8th. And I don't think there's any way in such a large group that that's all going to be accomplished satisfactorily in a 2-hour period. There's just, too many questions, to get everybody on the same page. I think it's a bridge too far myself, but
It's possible.
I don't know.
I'm sorry.
But Jim and others, do you have a view? I don't know.
I'm willing to wait until the information is presented and then struggle with it, wrestle with it. And if we need more time, we need more information.
Or at least you ought to have the option after, I agree with you, let's wait for May 8th. But if there is a level of dissatisfaction in terms of people's understanding, that shouldn't be the end of it. There should be an opportunity to have another meeting or whatever, plan a way for
Is
this.
that possible to do another?
I didn't say it was, I'm just saying that there
It's
should.
been advertised that there's another meeting.
For the final,
But that's
but it says
June.
it says the final decision meeting, not let's tweak the
In
mind.
the
No
June
no
one.
one, no one has ever used the words final decision meeting.
Okay,
It was
well,
fine,
Something
kind of
you made up.
final.
No, I'm not, all I'm just saying, I'm just asking,
What is
I'm just-
the name title of that?
Eric, all I'm advocating is for is.
Third all muds.
Okay.
I can't speak between the two of them.
I want to suggest we move along.
All I was suggesting,
no.
to finish my thought, was that all I'm suggesting is that the consideration, and like there is that additional meetings subsequent to May 8th may need to be
And
had.
they're already scheduled.
No, but the June one, as I understand, we're talking about the AC pipe.
What we presented, when I presented the dates, was that first date was the start, the structural, second date was the rest of the report. The June date would be any follow-up to the treatment plant and ideally get into the AC. We also have another date that's possible if we
Okay.
need it. So
Well, that's fine.
there's no rush here. We all need to understand the information. There's no pushing of any of the data. We need to be understanding of the data, right?
That's
And so to Jim's point, if the data comes back on May 8th, we're going to have to wrestle with it. There's likely going to be a lot of questions.
okay. That's all I was
Yeah,
asking. I was
and I'm
asking
just-
for
and
that
I'm-
opportunity.
There seems to be a lot of fear before we've even gotten to the information.
Well, because
itself.
I've listened to several other MUD meetings and there's a lot of saying we have to get this out July or August if we want to go get bonds. And that's the pressure I'm hearing from other MUDs, that they want to have a decision made on which option we're choosing by a certain date so that we can effectively apply for bonds if we so desire this year. You haven't heard that? Well, I've heard it.
My recollection of what was driving the schedule was the concept of potentially calling rollback elections. And those have to be called in August for a November rollback election. If MUDs, and I mean, it's going to be tough to line all this stuff
Exactly.
out. But best case scenario, if all the information was provided to everybody's satisfaction, and people felt like they were comfortable choosing an option, whatever that option is, I'm not getting into all that. But
Fair.
But, if they choose an option, then the next question is, everybody has to grapple with, how are we gonna pay for it? Are we going to, if the River Authority issues bonds, great, it's gonna flow through in the wholesale rate. That's the way their mechanism works. But for the districts, the next decision is, Do we pass it through with retail rates? Do we hold a rollback election because it's going to be over our 3.5% or 8%, depending on whether developed or developing? And if we are, then we have to determine, okay, if it's going to be this year that we try to capture some of that rollback. The deadline to call a November election is August. So I think the schedule was backed into to give time for that. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work and you lose an election cycle.
Not as a necessity, but you have to at least look at it for planning
On a
purposes
planning
to
basis.
see if the MUDs got to that point. But if the MUDs don't get to that point, then we have to move past that. But you still have to look at you still have to look out, forward to see what you might be up against. So there's no push or rush to do that. But we have to be aware of those dates in order to plan ahead if we get to that point. If we don't get to that point, like Brian said, then we have to continue on and educate and get comfortable with the plan forward until we make a decision. So that's how it's been all along. There's no underlying push to rush anything. I mean, everybody's got to get comfortable. All the MUDs have to figure out how they're going to pay for it, right? And so we can't even do the financial analysis until the MUDs decide what they want to do.
Sure.
Meaning, i.e., the result to the community, result to a particular customer. What will it do to a bill? What will it do to a tax bill? What will it do to a water bill? We can't even do that analysis until we get to a comfort level of all these analysis. And that's what we're just going through right now.
Fair enough. But you do say there is a possibility if the May 8th meeting isn't conducive, you might have an interim one before the 8th. So was it June 10th? Okay.
Yeah.
That would be helpful, knowing that we have an
We
option.
put contingencies in place
Okay.
in case we couldn't get to, in case there was more grappling that we needed to do, which likely there will be. That's fine.
Okay, that would help.
That works. That's all I was asking.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get there.
We'll get somewhere, that's for sure.
Move along. Item 13, receive update regarding status of Bear Branch, Panther Branch Research Forest Drainage Improvements Project. Authorize any action.
Yeah, I have a draft memo from LJ. I've reviewed it. I have some comments that I'm getting back to them before we get a final version and get a stakeholder meeting scheduled. So we'll get that here in the next few weeks.
It's been a while. I totally forgot where we were.
Yeah, they were going to be basically summarizing their work and putting a memo together that identified the true benefits of that option, so that memo or document could then kind of be moved around and see if there's any funding.
Funding. That's right. Okay.
So
I'm
it's
just
coming soon.
legal question on that. Is there a date certain that we have to do something? Even if it's to say, hey, we need more time, or
We do have I think LJA has already submitted one letter to the Water Development Board about the change in the scope or the lack of funding. And then, there's going to have to be additional communication with the Water Development Board about whatever the revised solution is, because that's going to have to be approved by them. And what the plan is for additional funds if there's going to be a shortfall. So there will have to be additional discussions, because there was a timeline as well on when the project was supposed to be completed. And we're obviously not meeting that. And that was part of the correspondence from.
it sounds like we're a long way from
Oh, yeah.
even getting the answer from the water board on whatever we submit.
Well, because at first you gotta have a plan for what is the new scope of work.
It's a ways away. I think, from what Eric's saying, right?
And if the project has to be unwound, is 167 out the cost of the bond? Yeah.
I mean, we would have to go through what that how that, gets unwound. There's more than we can just kind of cover off the cuff, but, we would have to ultimately, if everybody just said, we're just shutting down shop, we're not going to do anything, those funds,
Anything further?
correct, unless there's a complete wholesale change in use that the Water Development Board would approve for some other project, which, I don't want to speculate on that, but let's just assume a base case that it's just being unwound and shut down. Those funds would have to be paid back to the to the Texas Water Development Board, and we would have to allocate pro rata responsibility for the costs that have been incurred among all the participant districts. So,
X 67.
well, including 67.
The last memo, I saw cost sharing and 67 wasn't in there. It was a ratio of all the monies that were contributed by the other MUDs.
Well, that's because they had to contribute funds to us,
Correct.
to 67. That 67 is holding an escrow, but 67 has separate bond proceeds from the water development.
And a grant.
Correct.
And
Well,
all
the
of
grant
that-
comes late, but yeah.
Yeah, but all of that, that's a different.
Yeah.
Calculation. So anyway. All right, no near-term solution. Okay, thank you.
Fine.
Yeah, so legislative session is still in full swing. We got another 6 weeks or so left. I went through a fairly detailed discussion about some of the various bills that we're tracking in the trustee meeting. Would encourage y'all to watch that video if you're interested in bills. You know, hearings are being held every day. And the school voucher or, education savings account bill is being discussed right now, which is a highly contentious bill. There's been some scuttlebutt about whether some members would leave to try to break quorum to prevent passage, and that would, of course, jam up the plumbing of the legislative process even more. That was done back in 21, so
Sure.
who knows if that'll be done again, but we're certainly monitoring that because it would impact a lot of other legislation.
We're done filing bills, right? It's all now.
The
Yeah.
general filing deadline has passed. There is no deadline for local bills, but I'll tell you, the calendar is your enemy at this point. I mean, if you haven't filed something right now, even if you file early, you got a 15% chance of getting your bill across the finish line. So you file this late, good luck.
There's 5,000 bills ahead of you.
More than that, like 10 or 9.
And the bill that Eric testified on, it's still going forward.
Still pending in committee, so that was good. We had Eric, we had a
Right.
number of other folks go, and it was favorably received, that testimony, and so it's still pending in committee.
It's a good place to keep.
Yes. Even better if it doesn't get there.
Yeah, but sometimes you can't stop it.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Happy to answer.
Glad Eric did that.
Anybody have a question for Eric?
You know,
All right, good afternoon. Couple of updates. We are continuing to assess the ditches throughout the woodlands. We did meet with a couple residents of 67, and we are coordinating with the contractor to get some of that clean out work and pipe work done that we had budgeted for there on the ditch with one of the residents that has come talk to you before. So we're working on that. Hopefully next month we can get started on that work, physical work. As we've already talked about today, we have all MUDs on May 8th, special trustee meeting on the 22nd of this month. And then also the Spring Creek drainage analysis that's been going on for the last year or two. The requirement is to have several town hall meetings. The next town hall meeting is scheduled for April 21st in Waller, where the original one town hall was. And then a week later, on April 28th, they will be bringing that town hall to the township offices. So April 28th, there'll be a presentation, I think similar to what you saw when it was at the township last time.
Will that impact MUD 67 in any way?
Perhaps somewhat. I mean, mostly it's gonna affect Spring Creek, mostly 386 and some of the districts along Spring Creek.
Okay.
There might be, I don't know what direct impact, but I thought I'd share that.
No, thank you. I just hear how interested I was in that meeting.
I did want to let you know that we did go live with the billing software, and your first bill came this month from the new billing software. So, so we're working out some bugs, but things are going relatively smoothly for as big a system as we have. I did, as I committed to a couple months ago when it was when I sent the matrix comparison to Corello and SGRA, I did create a consolidated one so you can see it where all of the MUD's choices. And so there's copies you got there. But you can kind of see how you relate to some of the other MUDs across the woodlands.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Did want to give you an update in the trustee meeting on the GRP specifically. Kim and I continue to meet with Brad, talk about the last meeting and the upcoming meeting. Next meeting is Monday, this coming Monday, the 21st. So I'll be there. And in the trustee summary in your packet, you can see a little bit about what I presented at the trustee meeting. Highlights were, mostly committee approved the demand projection for 2026 budget. And then Lone Star was at the meeting with their geologist, and there was a long discussion about essentially the prescribed decline of the aquifers under the current models that Lone Star is working from. And so there was a lot of dialogue there. And then I requested that additional agenda item be on the next agenda to talk about folks' the committee members' goals. I also presented that to the trustees last week to get confirmation that the goals that as I saw it, were aligned with the goals of the trustees and the MUDs. And so those were essentially, maximizing utilization of the facility itself, lowering costs whenever we can, or rates, and then an eye on subsidence, just to be sure with it. But those are the three main topics, and all of the trustees concurred with those as general goals for the woodlands.
I'm glad you did that. I think that was important for that group to identify what their goals are, because it's hard to tell sometimes where people are pulling. So I appreciate you doing that.
Thank you.
I'm particularly thankful for, you bringing up the subsidence, because that is often a forgotten item.
Definitely there. It's definitely a piece of it.
I mean, not to, I do back on one of the other JRP, some of the graphs that we showed historically, and we don't really show kind of based on what we know over history, how I think that's changing, or how aquifer levels are changing over time. I mean, that is kind of not hidden information, but it's not widely known information. Let's put it that way.
I actually asked for that in the meeting.
Yeah.
And Lone Star respond for the entire Montgomery County, all the wells, since they permit all the wells. And the response was that'd be a little bit too big of a task. So
Was that about the things that Ben Slotnick showed, the diagrams of each well?
more or less,
The elevations of the water and the.
it was some graphical graphs showing essentially the decline of static water level as it relates to certain wells. And the idea was, when does that static water level drop so low that it starts to make wells not usable? And that was when I asked the question about, well, I'd love to see this for the whole county, because I'm more, do we have 5 years left? Do we have 20? I mean, I think people would want to know how long their infrastructure will last, because you can't drill a water well lower. You'd abandon it, and you can lower equipment for so long until you get to the bottom or close to. So
You were in that GRP meeting, right? I know Chris was chairing, but you saw those diagrams on the wells and the static levels. And is it possible for us to get those for our woodland mud wells?
We've already provided it there.
we have it.
Oh, do you
I got
have?
it last.
Cool.
Yeah.
How many wells do we have, Ed?
37.
Fun to see that. When you look at it, you see anything that was alarming or said, oh, heads up?
Well, quite honestly, the chart I see has all 37 on the same graph, and so it's hard to see anything other than a bunch of squiggly lines.
It does indicate that in the next few years, there's a couple wells that are going to need to be addressed, likely condemned. And I think Chris has indicated that, the long-term plan would likely be to look at the lesser producing wells as time goes on, and condemn those over time, and then, maybe condemn a couple, 2 or 3, 4, whatever it is, and then build back a larger well that produces more. So kind of get rid of your inefficient ones,
Yeah.
and build a more efficient one, 1 for 3 or 4, whatever the numbers.
We have to have water wells to back up the surface to hold.
We do.
That's silly.
Well, and really, we need the water wells in case surface water goes down.
Exactly.
That's what we have.
Yeah, no, I think that's good.
And or drought, because,
Yeah.
if the GRP's drought get triggered by a number of things, but one of the things is the lake going down a certain amount, then they start backing off. Well, if they back off, we got to step up.
Yeah.
And if our wells are gone, we can't do it. And then you start getting into a situation where we will have drought contingency issues and reductions in water and so forth. So it's something that we don't want to get to as a community.
We have to, I'll meet with you. I'd like to see those just so I can learn more about the water wells. I appreciate it. Thank you.
That's all I have.
16, discuss Woodlands Water Protocol for agenda setting and meetings package creation.
Yeah, so that was asked by a director or two. I've actually put it on all the agendas just to remind everybody what our protocol is. We need to get, if there's any requests for agenda items for agendas, either for the trustee or for the MUD meetings, we need to have them by the end of the day on Wednesday, week prior. We typically finalize the agendas on Thursday, coordinating with Brian's office on Thursday. And then that sets us up to be able to collate all these packets. Usually takes about a half a day to gather all the backup that goes in here for each different MUD, make all the copies to have them prepared for y'all to be able to pick up or get to them on Friday. So you'll have them over the
So
weekend.
Wednesday.
End of the day, Wednesday.
When is the trustee, what day is the trustee meeting?
Wednesday.
In the evening.
Mhm.
You see, for me, and I understand why you need some time, but for me in particular, I see the trustee, I watch a trustee meeting the next day because I guess I can come up here on Wednesday night. But it helps me form what some of the critical issues are that we're dealing with this month. And if it's not on I can't get it on the agenda if you're asking me to put it on before this trustee meeting. That's kind of difficult. So we do.
We have to file with the county. We don't have a choice here. Yeah.
What do you have to do? I'm sorry.
We have to file the agendas with the county, and we have to file no shorter than 72 hours prior to the meeting. Well, that falls on a Sunday, and we're not allowed to do it on Sunday, Saturday, and their cutoff is Friday afternoon. And so
I
that's,
wasn't aware of the county requirement. I was aware of the public posting requirement.
yeah,
There's another one to give it to the county.
to file with the county.
So they have to have it Friday at 5 o'clock.
No, they cut it off. They've shortened that even. It used to be
Uh-huh.
5, then 4:30, now it's 3. And so we can't get bump up to that because we wouldn't have time to do everything. So
I
that's
didn't know the county got involved.
that's the process.
Why is the county involved in a mud business?
Texas Open Meetings Act. So you got to post at the county courthouse. You have to post in the district. You have to post in
We have to go to the
administrative.
county courthouse as well. I knew we had to do it out there.
Yep.
And in the district.
And in the
Yes.
district, administrative office, in the district, and at the courthouse.
Okay.
It's a big process
So the
every month.
formal deadline is Wednesday for everybody.
In the
at
day, yeah.
End of the day, 5 o'clock.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we'll be able to accommodate.
I asked people, I got all kinds of answers, just so you know, that's why I put it on here. There seemed to be a bunch of confusion.
Yeah, I had presented that at the new director orientation last year, but I thought it was a good idea to kind of get everybody back up to speed
Yeah,
on it.
'cause-
So,
okay, Wednesday at 5 PM.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
thank you.
Paul, trustees report.
Just real quickly on page 68, a couple of changes there on the financials. The cash balance should read 513,531. It was a last minute change and didn't get it to the recorder. And secondly, the year-to-date capital purchases should read 347,049, 347,000. And I'll pass on the rest of that. Thank you.
Brian, do we need,
We do not.
yeah, okay. Discuss any matters for future agendas?
See, when is our next meeting? Date of our next meeting? Is it it's after the May 8th meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think most definitely we'll need to include on the agenda everything. So you wrote a good summary of how to, and make sure we talk and act on anything that happens in that meeting.
Yes, that's a good point too. I've shared this with a few directors. there's been I've seen some directors want to write out all of their thoughts as specific agenda items to really capture particular spots. And as Brian will confirm, that restricts you from only talking about that thing. And so generally what we'll do is make it more generic, related to whatever the general topic is, which will allow you to talk about all things under that umbrella, if that makes sense.
So you think what we put under 12 this time would be also applicable for the next meeting, discuss and act on the wastewater treatment plant evaluation #1 by Corolla? So I'd like to add that to our agenda for sure. That'll save me writing.
Okay.
And then being told how to rewrite it properly.
We got it.
Okay, any others?
Get it done.
Meeting's adjourned.